And yes, I could then recapture with the bishop, which was probably actually quite a good move because it would have been a fork, come to think of it. Now that I look at it, I should have just recaptured, right? Boom. And then it would have been bishop and I would have had a fork. There we go. Coucou, couture everybody, Coach Rab here, and welcome to another Kilted Chess Noob episode. I am not a chess coach, not even close. I'm a health and wellness coach that happens to love chess. Today's episode is probably some of the best chess I've played to date. For those who've been following, they know that my goal for this first year mainly is to try and get my chess daily score up to 1500. You know, if you win games in chess, your chess score goes up. If you lose them, it comes back down again. And I've been gradually building up. I'm around 1300 at the moment. Now, not to be confused with the rapid rating. And rapid rating is you've got 10, 15, 30-minute games and pressure's on, basically. But when you're doing the daily stuff, you've got a bit more time to think it through and look at tactics and all this kind of stuff. So at the moment, first hurdle, get my daily rating up. Now, in my recent games, I have been playing like, according to game review, 1400, 1500, and away up at 1700. Now, the reason that this game is, for me, I feel some of the best play is because I made a boo-boo in the beginning and I fought back by some of the stuff I've learned. I utilized a bunch of tactics. I'd started to see them. I was like, and I managed to then get the victory gradually. So it was more of a case of fighting back. Now, game review, you don't see all these bits and pieces and energy bars up the side during the game, but afterwards, when you watch game review, you can learn from it. The computer, which has got a rating of 3,500 or whatever its super duper score is on chess, it doesn't like all of the moves I make, but I like them because they made sense to me and my style of play at the moment, and it got me the victory. So I'm going to take you through it step by step, and we'll look at what went wrong initially and how I had to start to fight back. So to start off with, I'm playing my Italian friend, and he opened up with the e4, and I did my usual caro can, which is when you push the c pawn forwards, and then your goal is to then push the d pawn afterwards. Now, this is the problem when you are a chess noob, is that you've got your openings, whether white and black, and you're in familiar territory. And where the noobness comes in is when you get pushed out of your comfort zone. You're like, oh, I don't like this. I don't recognize this. Because what my opponent then did is push the pawn. And it's not part of the opening that I'd really rehearsed before. I knew that it wasn't potentially great, but I couldn't really work out how to capitalize on it. I didn't want to just jump my pawn straight forward into this usual position, because then there's a move called en passant. You know, if you move your pawn 2 spaces in its opening, which you've got the option to, and you land side by side with your opponent's pawn, and it's there, and as long as they do it on the next move, they're allowed to just take you. So I didn't want to risk en passant, so ultimately I had to then just push the pawn forward. Now, the reason this is a pickle is that I'm not in my caro can territory, first and foremost. I can't get my knight out because the pawn's in the way. I have freed up the bishop, I guess, but if he takes, I was kind of like, well, I guess I take with the queen. I felt very, very boxed in. I was in unknown territory. So right from the opening, I would attribute a lot of my early success these days to mastering or memorizing, is probably more accurate, the openings. It gives me a good setup and it allows me to then push on. This just turned on its head. So again, my opponent didn't take advantage of it. It pulled in his next pawn to support. And then from that position, I thought, right, I'm going to go to what I know. So I took my caro can position. It allowed me to get what's familiar. But normally by move 3, I would have this pawn here, the c pawn, into this position. And then I could bring my knight out and so on and so forth. So already I felt like I was a little bit behind in my development. So I was like, not great. He pulls out his b pawn. I'm not sure quite what he was maybe doing. Maybe he was planning to bring his bishop out. Who knows? I got my bishop out because I know with these sort of caro can structures, the next move I'd be wanting to do is to push this pawn and close off these sort of the pyramid format. And I wanted my bishop outside my pawn chain to do that. So I was getting my bishop out with the goal of then moving said pawn. He brought his pawn forward, putting more pressure on the centre, and I closed my pyramid. So right off the bat, I'm almost in familiar territory. This is kind of like the panel variation when this pawn is played. I really probably should have brought this knight out at some point, but I can't because it's trapped. So right off the bat, I don't have a lot of breathing space. I'm stuck here. I'm on the 5th rank from because from black you go from 8th to 5th. He's got a lot of control of the centre and he's got a lot of space in his back row. So he's got lots of places to move. I did not. My opponent brought his knight out and this added pressure to the centre. So again, it's like, right, okay, the pressure is on now. He's building to take that. Now, at the moment, he's got 2 attackers on here, but luckily I've got technically 3 defenders if you include the queen. So I wasn't too concerned at this stage. I wanted to pin his knight. I was going to just activate this. I wasn't sure which way I was going to castle at this moment, but I still had options, and then I could have castled. So I was pinning his knight out because he can't now move his knight. If he tries to take, he can't because it would put him in check. So that was a nice pin there. He unpins said knight by putting his bishop in the way, and then I activated mine, giving myself some wiggle room in the back row to then, potentially castle. He moved his bishop into the centre. I'm not quite sure what the purpose of that. I don't know quite what he achieved other than getting eyes down this corner, but so be it. I then castled. I was like, right. Usually try and castle by move 10. So I achieved it by, what's that, move 8. So I was like, right. King is protected in the corner. Game review doesn't like it, but the energy bar, if you see up the side, is fairly even at this stage, right? I don't feel like it was even. I felt very boxed in, although I had some activated pieces. I didn't feel in control. It was an unknown territory. I needed to get this pawn out and start winning the centre. He brings his knight out, defending this pawn, and obviously pushes another piece, and it also lines up and would allow him to castle soon. And then from this position, this is where I'm starting to think, right, I needed to push back. So I wanted to push this out because what I'm trying to do is I need to start winning in the centre, but this pawn chain here is a problem. So I'm pushing this pawn with the hope of then trying to push this next pawn forward. That was my thinking at the time. And of course, he was having none of it because he then wants to kick my bishop, which I didn't see at the time. I don't know why I wasn't thinking. I was like, argh. So anyway, kicks the bishop. I have a bit of wiggle room, so I pull back. Then I was kind of banking on him. I knew he was going to push me again and I had wiggle room to move. And he did. He pushed me again and I gave myself a bit of wiggle room. Now, the game review doesn't like this position, right? It says that was an inaccuracy and it wanted me to move all the way back to get eyes on this pawn. But I felt there was no point getting eyes on that pawn because it was defended twice, right? And that would be the only one attacker. What I'm trying to do is pile pressure onto here, which my goal was going to be by pushing a pawn and then, taking and then obviously get knight into play. So at this stage, I'm like, right, that's okay. He then pushed the pawn forward, which was okay because I had wiggle room, and I sat back in the corner. Again, game review doesn't like this. It gives my opponent a 1.3 advantage. But I was okay with this because I was setting something up in this corner. And this is when I say that, I feel like my play has been improving, is I was utilising the pawns, the soul of chess, to try and push forward. So what I was basically trying to do, I was going to give him a bit of a pawn gambit, right? So he moved this knight across and he's putting pressure on my bishop at the moment. But I'm thinking in this corner, I wanted to give a bit of a pawn gambit because if he was to then take, I can then get up here and start putting pressure on. So he puts my bishop in problems. I thought, right, well, I'm going to have to move. I didn't have many squares to go to. It's really the only one, but it is defended. So I moved up to there. He puts pressure. And by this point, I'm thinking, right, all my pawns are on light squares. That would have been a good defender for said light squares, but all his pawns were on dark squares, so it's not really attacking. I was like, right, we just need to sacrifice because he's going to get taken by pawn. And I didn't want to let him to just be taken because then he puts even more pressure on the centre. So I sacrificed, allowed him to take. Now, I understand that still gives, but this piece will likely move. And then from there, I started pushing up through here. Now, again, what I'm trying to do is put pressure and win back the centre. I thought to myself, if he was to take, I would recapture. And then from the bishop would have eyes there. And then I'd be able to then push this pawn forward and then have double eyes on. Okay. He castled. And then that was the gambit. This is what I set up from what I was talking about earlier on. I wanted to remove this defender here. Okay. His B pawn. The reason for that is that when I then push this, there'd be no defender there. He takes, and I'd then have my bishop sitting on the c-file. That was the goal. If he didn't take, my goal was to take, and if he was going to take, then there would have been a bit of a problem because he would have then had his rook on eyes on me. So I was thinking to myself, if he doesn't take, I wasn't quite sure if I was going to push or just leave it sitting there. Regardless, he fell for said gambit. And rather than me returning, I then pushed. So what this does is it adds an attacker to that centre with the backup of the bishop behind. Okay, what he's got at the moment in terms of that centre, nobody was defending it. You know, all these bishops, this knight is on my pawn, but he doesn't have anything actually defending his centre at the moment. So it was kind of like a push. I needed to control the middle to then also get eyes on his king. All right. He brought his bishop across. Now, it seems to think this is a blunder. At the time of playing, I thought, well, I'm not sure, because it does add a bit of a defence. It was scuppering my plans. Now, Game Review doesn't like what I do next, but there is method to the madness. It wants me to take here now. Oh, it wants me to take. He'll probably return, and then I would take. But what was going through my head, and I calculated, is that he would then retake with his queen, and his queen would be in a very dangerous point in the centre, and I didn't really have an answer for it at that time, or certainly not what I could see. So what I wanted to do was not encourage this to happen just yet. I didn't mind if he took me, because if he took me, then I'd have the choice to retake or not, because the pawn wasn't in any danger, and it would just be sitting there stuck for now. So what I did was I pushed the queen out. The Game Review doesn't like that. I wanted to put pressure on this knight, but I also wanted to back up said pawn, and I had a goal what I was wanting to do, because I wanted to then mobilise this knight to then start putting pressure and getting it jumping in. I was going gallop hopping with my knight. Like I say, Game Review didn't like my plan, but what does Game Review know? Anyway, right, so from there I moved my queen. He jumped his knight out of danger, because if he hadn't, I would have taken his knight. There was nothing attacking it, and I would have been putting eyes on here and eyes on there, so it would have been a nice fork. So he very cleverly jumped his knight out of danger. And then from that position there, I then started my gallop. My goal is to go here, and then I want to go here, so it puts pressure on his bishop, which he knew was coming. He pushes a pawn, not quite sure what the reason for that was, but maybe he was just giving his king some wiggle room, not sure. I brought the rook to the open file. Mostly, like I say, game doesn't like it, says it's an inaccuracy. The reason I did that was at the time I just thought to myself, I just want to take the channel. My concern was if I immediately jumped to here, he might have taken the channel, and yes, I was going to move on, but then he would have had said channel. And in my head, I was thinking, I want that B file. I was like, that's mine. I'm taking it. So I brought that out. Game Review doesn't like it, but there was method to the madness. He pushed his pawn. I'm guessing he thought there was some a danger here with me taking. I'm not quite sure, because he had eyes on there. Not quite sure what his reason for, or by pushing as well. I mean, I could have jumped in there. I'm not sure. But anyway, he pushed said pawn. I gallop across. Again, it says it's a mistake. It wants me to take in the middle, but I had a different plan. I want to get my knight into here. When I get my knight on here, I then have eyes. That bishop is the problem. That's what I need to get to. That bishop is protecting this, along with the queen and his knight, but I want to take away one of those defenders. That was said goal. He eventually does take the pawn, but I wasn't concerned, because I was planning to move the knight anyway, and once it does, that pawn's stuck there for now, and it adds as a nice shield anyway. So jumped in the knight. Now, Game Review loves this position. It's like, yes, I love it. Because it forced this to move, and it was a defender of said pawn. So it jumps in, but it moved into a slightly different position. So I was like, okay, right, where are we going to go from here? Realised I could jump up here. Now, the goal with this fork, I didn't plan to try and take his rook. I would have just lost my knight. Okay, if anything, I was going to be then taking this bishop here. Okay. But I needed to cause some pressure. The knight was protected by the queen. So I knew he wasn't going to try and risk taking it, because he was just going to lose his queen. And I knew that he was then going to have to move this. And I knew that when he moved that, things were going to get a little bit interested. So when I jumped in, I'm putting pressure here. Now, whilst I could have then just taken his bishop, this bishop at the moment, whilst there's eyes on that pawn, it wasn't my greatest concern. And he would then just recapture with the rook if I was to take. So instead, once he moves his rook, I then go to fork down. Okay, so this jump in here has eyes on that bishop and eyes on that rook. Now, I knew what he'd likely do. He was probably going to move this rook, and that would give him eyes right down here on mine. But I didn't mind the trades at this point if he went for that, because I had a bishop here and I could also recapture the file with my own rook. So I wasn't that concerned. It was this bishop that I wanted. That was the problem. And this is where I'm saying I think I've leveled up my gameplay. Is I've started to think strategically about what to take rather than just being all guns blazing for the king. He pushed his bishop up on this position, which was a bit of a blunder. I saw what he was doing. He was putting eyes on my queen. If I took the queen back, his knight was going to take me. All right, so I was like, right, okay. And if I took his thing, etc. So if I took his rook, he was then going to take, and I would be in a world that hurts. And I didn't want to lose my queen. But what it did was it gave me the very pawn that I needed. I took with the queen. So all of a sudden, I've now got this barrage, and I have pinned that rook. That rook cannot move now until the king's out the way. So I've got rid of one of the defenders, or one of the blockades in the middle from that position. He brings it back. Now, this is where the fight for the middle comes in. So he pushes back, puts pressure on my queen, and then I jump in with the knight, and of course he recaptures. Now, this is again when I'm going to blow my own trumpet. That knight is a bit of a problem because it's protected by the queen. So I couldn't have just taken, or he would have taken. Now, Game Review wanted me to do that. Game Review said, take that, they'll recapture. But again, I just don't like the idea of having the queen in the centre. And yes, I could then recapture with the bishop, which was probably actually quite a good move because it would have been a fork, come to think of it. But now that I look at it, I should have just recaptured, right? Boom. And then it would have been bishop, and I would have had a fork. There we go. Game Review does know best. But anyway, I went on a bit of a different quest. I was trying to remove that this. Now, what I was wanting to do is move my knight into here to take that. Now, I know that knight at the moment is if I jumped in there, either knight could get me. So what I was planning to do, move my queen out of danger at the moment. The reason I did that is I wanted the bishop to take. So then if he took, then I'd have my queen. That's what I was thinking. Obviously, Game Review preferred me to have taken. With hindsight, it was probably the better move now that I look at it. Anyway, at the time, I was like, right, I want the bishop to take. He then pulls his rook in to add another layer of protection. So then I'm thinking to myself, right, I really need to get this in. But what's happened, when he moved his rook, he's now pinned his knight. This knight cannot move now, otherwise it'll put check on the king. You see that line all the way up there, he's pinned. So I knew that if I could get my knight there, this one could move, but this one would. So I had to remove that knight. This is called removing the guard. This is another tactic. I'm taking advantage of the pin and removing the guard. So I needed to remove the guard. Now, it found a great... It says, great way. We found a way to win a knight. It's forcing that knight there. So I'm attacking him. There's nothing that can really damage said pawn. If he jumped here, he would have got bingoed. If he jumped here, he probably would have got bingoed, so I'd open up the channel. He really could only jump back, which my opponent then did, and that's when I jumped in. Computer's like, this is another great move. If I just got the one earlier, I wouldn't have needed any of this, but I'm still learning, hence the noob. I've then jumped in, putting pressure on that knight. It's pinned, and I wasn't worried about the rook. So he was like, oh. So he then put eyes on my queen, but I didn't really matter because when he put eyes on the queen, originally I was going to capture with the knight. But because he moved here, I needed to capture with the bishop to put him in check. So he then has to deal with that problem first. He couldn't just take my queen, which is exactly what I did. I took that, placing him in check. Now, he had a couple of options. He could have moved there, or he could have just taken. He decided to move, which is fine. So from that position there, I then took his rook. So from here, I calculated if it takes, and then I would still take with check, and that would force him to either block or block, right? So I did the calculations. I thought, I'm okay with that. Sacrifice queen, He takes and I take. Remember, although I was sacrificing the queen, I was getting a rook and a queen in return for a queen. All right, so that's 5 points for a rook, 9 points for a queen, 14 to my 9 because I lost my queen in the process. You know, I was up. It's +5, which is fine. Puts him in check and then forces him. He decides to block with said bishop. And this is when things start to get a little bit interesting, because at the end game, if you see I'm 6.6 up, this is where I usually sometimes miss things. I did miss an early checkmate, but so be it. Push the pawn. The reason I pushed the pawn was at this stage, I didn't want his... if he was going to try and take, I would take. But my goal here, I wanted to move my knight. And the minute I moved my knight anywhere in this position, he could take my bishop and still have eyes on his own bishop. So I was like, how do I protect my bishop so he can't just take it? So I supported it with the pawn first. So I was like, right, protect bishop, and that'll allow me to get a bit of wiggle room with the knight. He pushed the pawn, so I jump in with check. He's going to have to move. From that position there, I jump in with check again, forcing him to move. Gobbled up. So that was a nice little fork that I got here. So once he moved that pawn, I was like, right, I kind of knew he only had one place to go, really. So once he went there, he moved. And the only reason he had one place to go is because my bishop had eyes here. So I knew that if once I jumped in here, he would have to move, and then I'd get a nice little fork. Fork being he's in check, but I've also got eyes on his rooks. Again, taking advantage of another of these tactics I'm trying to learn and get better at. By this point, my opponent's probably frustrated. He has to move. I gobbled up his rook. He moved his bishop, attacking my rook. So the natural thing, I'd have to move the rook anyway, because otherwise he'll bingo me. So the natural thing is to pop him into check. And he runs down the way. Plus 7.9 on the analysis bar at the moment. So, you know, very much got the game in hand. He's got a knight and a bishop, and he's got a trapped pawn. He does have a passed pawn here, but I wasn't worried because I had the rook on that end. I pushed the pawn forward. I'm not sure if that was the best. I wanted to protect that pawn, but I wasn't paying attention on this one, to be honest with you. I was pushing up, and I wasn't even thinking about that he could take, but so be it. He took anyway. I recaptured. I thought, just simplify things, because what I didn't want to happen is if it didn't, all of a sudden he's got pawn eyes down here, and he's backed up by his king, and he has a bishop down here, and I thought, oh, this could actually get a bit tricky here. So I didn't want to mess around with that. He recaptured there. I pushed up the pawn. I honestly thought he was going to recapture here, but he pushed his king, which he reckons is mate in 3. Now, if I knew what I was doing, I probably would have got that mate in 3, but clearly I don't. I thought to myself, I'll pin this knight and I'll capture on the next move. The reason it's pinned is, as we said before, the knight cannot move because the king's in the same line. He tried to push the pawn. I just gobbled the knight. Now, at this point, his king cannot take that pawn because it's protected. He's also in check. He can't go here because it's protected. So basically, he's got one option, really, 1 or 2. So, and he ended up opting for this one. It still reckons it's mate in 3. I brought my king out. Now, the reason I moved the king to here was I wanted to then obviously get the equivalent, start covering lines. He pushed his bishop forward. I don't know if that was a mouse slip or not. I'm not really sure. Now, this is where I made a boo-boo. It was mate in 1. If I had just moved that rook, put him in check, guess what? He can't go there, he can't go there, he can't go there, and he couldn't go there because he's in check. That would have been mate in 1. It was a similar idea of what I thought was going to happen in 2 moves, but I wasn't paying, well, I was paying attention, but I wasn't. My goal had been to push him up or down, because if he'd gone up the way, then it would have been checkmate at the bottom. If he'd gone down the way, it would have been that move. I had the right idea. I didn't realise I could have got it sooner, so I put him in check again. He pushed down the way, and then I got the checkmate in the end. So, apart from that little boo-boo in the middle where I probably should have taken with the queen. What was that move? 18, was it? Was it 18? Was it way back here? Where was it when I should have taken? Was it? No. Where were we? Was it that one? Was it? It wanted me to take, yes, way back here. Oh, yeah. So, apart from that one, I should probably, if I'd seen that one, that would have been, hold on, it would have been take. If I'd done take, then it would have been probably take, and that would have been a lovely pinned fork. He would have moved probably. Would I have taken? Oh, it wants me to go back. Interesting. but I still would have pinned this. So very, very interested if the move is king. So, but ultimately I would have been in a more dominating position. But still, sorry, I've got a bit of a cold. I felt like the play is improving overall. I think I'm gradually getting better. It said I played like a 1450, I think, overall rating. My goal for this year is I'm consistently playing closer to 1500. So chess.com's got my rating about right, because prior to this game I was 1324, I think. I'm playing around my rating, so my handicap is about right, I would say. A few things to learn on. I'm starting to see things. It's just, you just need a bit more vision and build on it. And that's the fun thing about chess when you take the time to study it, is that you can, go over moves, watch your game reviews, look at where you can improve, what you missed, that sort of thing. But the key takeaway from this was that I made the mistake in the beginning of trying to get into my comfort zone with my opening. Really, I need to become so good that if I'm not regardless of my opening, I should be able to play good chess. At this moment, I only seem to play well when I get into my comfort zone. And by that point, I'd already lost my flow. I'd lost tempo anyway. I felt like I was behind on my development. But where I feel I came on was I was starting to use my pawns and utilise tactics like pins, removing the guard, all that good stuff. So there has been progress made, I'm sure of it. So hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. It's for you. If you haven't played chess before and you fancy it, go to chess.com. I'd recommend it. You can sign up for free and you can play games online. You can either play rapid games, which are more like fast 10, 15, 30-minute games, or you can play daily style games where you can play a couple of moves a day and just it's a much more relaxed pace and you can just enjoy the game. And the good thing is when you start off, you'll then eventually get paired with people your own level. You'll win some, you'll lose some, it happens. But if you just always enjoy the process, then you'll gradually get better over time and play chess well. Thank you so much, everybody, and have an awesome week ahead. Bye-bye.